There's no one-size-fits-all approach to creating a successful fundraising strategy and plan.
People are nervous, right? It's a big deal. We're raising $10 million, even if we're raising $1 or $3 million, depending on the size of the org.
Major gift fundraising is not deadline driven. It really is probably the only type of fundraising, along with planned giving, that is not deadline driven.
AI comes on the scene that's affordable, accessible, that can provide insights and personalization at scale.
That's the first core element of this fundraising engine or funnel, is making sure that the top of your funnel, the beginning of your fundraising process, you are in front of the right people.
What do the people we serve need? And how do we open the door to help them get there?
What happens a lot of times is we get this discomfort or this fear, and our brain tells our body to stop.
We can acquire donors and we can automate everything. And that's where I worry, at least personally, around the perils of AI, that it would remove humans from the interaction.
This is the Intentional Fundraiser Podcast.
Welcome to the Intentional Fundraiser Podcast. Today, we are talking with my friend and fan favorite, Cherian Koshy. Cherian is a visionary with more than 25 years of social impact leadership and transformation. His expertise blends nonprofit acumen with technological innovation, exemplified through his creation of the game-changing Nonprofit OS. As a CFRE, a Chartered Advisor in Philanthropy, and a Series 65 holder, he brings a unique combination of technical expertise, financial oversight, and philanthropic strategy. He serves as VP at Kindsight, where he continues integrating cutting-edge tech with effective fundraising methods. As the creator of Engage, Kindsight's generative AI tool that builds fundraising campaigns and creates personalized, meaningful outreach at scale, he has revolutionized nonprofit operations, marking a significant leap in the sector and advancing industry standards. As many of you know, Cherian is also an amazing keynote speaker, energizing and empowering global audiences with actionable, data-driven strategies, translating complex concepts into accessible impact solutions. And in his spare time, he is vice chair of external relations on the AFP Global Board. And he's a husband and a dad of 3, and they have a dog. How does he do it? That is a topic for another day. Today, we are here to talk about navigating stakeholder expectations, whether they be board members or donors or even your executive leadership team. We're going to talk about managing return on investment, balancing short-term and long-term goals, and leveraging technology in fundraising while maintaining human connections. That's all we're going to talk about, Cherian.
Just a few little things.
A little casual, light convo.
Yeah. And actually, I got a little promotion. I am now the treasurer on the AFP Global Board. So
Treasurer. Wow. Congrats.
It's so great to be here with you, Tammy.
Well, it is
As
an
always.
honor to have you. Thank you. And as you and I were chatting, you're one of the few people that we've had on like multiple times, and not just twice. I think this is your 3rd appearance.
I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it's just being in the right places at the right time. Let's follow Tammy around. And
Well, I appreciate that kind sentiment. All right. So let's jump in. We've got a lot to cover.
Yeah.
So let's start by tackling how to navigate key or senior stakeholders, right? So Cherian, as a leader in the industry, how do you advise nonprofit organizations to engage with those high-level stakeholders, such as board members and major donors and executive leadership, to align their expectations with fundraising strategies?
You bet. So one of the things I've learned over a lot of years and unfortunately, a lot of trial and error is that sometimes we feel, because we know what best practices are in fundraising, that if we just inform them what best practices are in fundraising, that they'll come along for the ride, that they'll see the light. But the reality is that most of the time, our leadership, whether they're staff leadership or board leadership, come from a very different lived and learned experience, from a different background. And it's not to say that they're wrong per se, it's that they come from a different perspective. So the most important thing is to be curious about their perspective, to understand where they're coming from, what makes them tick, what's driving their decision making, so that you can meet them where they are in terms of how they're seeing a process layout, how they're aligning a decision making matrix. So, for example, I was doing a presentation at the Bridge conference in DC, and someone asked, how do I convince my board to do this? And I said, how does your board make decisions generally? How do they look back at these decisions that you've seen them make in the past, and what was their criteria? And the person thought about it for a moment, and he said, they always ask for who else made this decision? Who else like us made this decision? I said, so clearly your board makes decisions based on social proof. They want to know what other like organizations are making decisions like they're making. So you want to preemptively know that and then come to your board or come to your leadership with that proof. Organizations like us, these types of organizations have done this, have invested in this, have made these types of decisions, and they have found success.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Kindsight builds technology that helps nonprofits make a difference. It was born when 3 leading-edge nonprofit technologies, iWave, Ascend, and Nonprofit OS, came together to better support organizations with purpose-built tools designed to make fundraising easier, faster, and more effective. With a combined 40 years working with nonprofits and other fundraising organizations, we have seen the generosity landscape evolve and change in ways we never could have predicted. It's become clear that the best approach to fundraising is a personalized and meaningful one, a human approach. But that's not easy when goals are high and resources are scarce. That's where Kindsight comes in. With Kindsight, fundraisers can find and qualify potential donors with the world's largest proprietary donor database, engage with those donors quickly and effectively with AI-powered content generation, and keep everything on track with a centralized CRM built specifically for fundraising teams. Connect your story to donors who care about your cause at any scale in real time. That's the power of Kindsight.
Now, I want to be very clear with your audience. Not all board members, not all executive leaders are looking for social proof. Just because one organization makes their decisions that way doesn't mean they all do it that way. That's why we have to start with curiosity to build that context. In medicine, they say that making a diagnosis without evaluating the patient is malpractice. So in the same way, we're not going to prescribe anything for anyone in your audience and say everything is a one-size-fits-all. This is what you do. In each of your organizations, with each one of your leaders, you want to understand what is it that makes them tick, and then start to think about how they would apply that logic. And then you're going to be wrong some of the times. You have to build upon that logic and that structure and work through that. But at least you're not applying it from sort of an unknown perspective or a generic perspective.
I love that. And I can see how curiosity is really at the core of that. Much like when we're talking to major donors.
Yes, indeed.
Right? Like we're asking them those discovery questions. Like, how do you evaluate nonprofit effectiveness? And what's the most meaningful way you've ever been thanked for a gift? And why this and why that?
What's the most meaningful gift you've ever given?
Yes.
Exactly the same. Precise way.
Yeah. And it is very interesting to me that as fundraisers, especially those of us who work in individual, face-to-face fundraising, whether it's with major donors or we are talking with people inside corporations or we're working with program officers at foundations, we naturally ask those questions or we've honed that skill. And yet, when we go to working with our internal audiences, our colleagues, the people we report to or our direct reports, we're not quite as gracious. We're not quite as curious.
I think that is a little bit of the axiom, and forgive me for being this blunt, but it's a little bit of familiarity breeds contempt, where we take a little bit of a shortcut when it comes to the people that we see very often. I sort of see that in my own home. I took the kids out to a restaurant one afternoon and someone came up and they're like, your kids are so polite. I laughed. I was like, they are not polite at home. They're at each other's necks at home. But when they're dealing with servers, of course, it's not someone that they deal with on a regular basis. So they're going to be more polite than they are with their siblings.
Of course.
Which I hope that that's at least the case, right? I want them to also be polite to their siblings. But I think there's an element of that we discount to a certain extent our relationships inside of the organization to a certain extent, and we forget some of that muscle memory that we built with external relationships.
Yeah, that is so relatable. So relatable. Mm-hmm. All right, now let's talk about managing return on investment.
Oh, yeah.
One of my favorite topics. So, Cherian, from your perspective, how should we as nonprofits, how should we measure return on investment of our fundraising campaigns? And what metrics specifically do you recommend to evaluate success beyond just top-line revenue, which is often how we are primarily judged?
So let me start at the top, just so that the soundbite doesn't get out in a weird way, that return on investment is an undeniably important metric. We have to keep an eye on the bottom line of our organization. There is a fiduciary responsibility of boards to be mindful of the economic efficiency of the organization, the efforts that are being spent. So we do need to look at things like cost to raise a dollar. We do need to look at things like how do we navigate the expenses and the revenues of our organization. However, back to that sort of medical analogy, when a doctor is looking at you as a patient, they're not just looking at the numbers. They're looking at the whole person. And when you think about the health of your organization, you do need to think of it as an organism, a living, changing body that's within a lot of variance, right? Things are changing from the external environment. Goodness gracious, are they ever changing right now at the external environment? But they're also changing in the internal environment. So are there numbers like, your heart rate and your breath rate and your blood pressure and your blood glucose level, all the things in your body that give us some hints as to your overall health? Absolutely. But does that tell us everything about your health? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. So within that analogy, what I want us to recognize is that ROI can't just be confined to these little bitty numbers, and we shouldn't just be measuring exclusively to the numbers. Otherwise, we will end up being data rich and insight poor. We'll end up being drip fundraisers. And I see a lot of organizations who are measuring to the metrics as opposed to fully understanding the ramifications of their fundraising strategy. So I like to say that not everything that matters can be measured, and not everything that can be measured matters. So things like, what Lynn Wester talks about all the time in terms of stewardship. Is there a direct, immediate, and timely ROI on donor stewardship? No. There's not something you can point to in the next month or the next quarterly P&L that says, this lunch, this phone call, this note that I sent a donor had an explicit ROI. Absolutely not. It doesn't. Does it actually matter? It absolutely does.
Yeah.
100% it does. So when we think about the relationship part of, well, I shouldn't say relationship part like it could be segmented. This is a relationship business. That's what we do. We have relationships with our donors. And I want to be clear, we're not just talking about individual donors. We're talking about institutional donors as well, because there are people behind those processes. If they feel disconnected, if they feel like it's a transaction, if they don't feel like they've had an impact, or what I love to say, if they forgot that they gave, if they forgot the impact that they had, if they forgot why they gave in the first place, then you will lose that relationship and that revenue in the future. And smart people in business understand this as well, that customer success has everything to do with that muscle memory of the customer as much as it does with the donor. As you think about your living, breathing organism of fundraising strategy in your nonprofit organization, what I would encourage everyone in the audience to think about is, how do we evolve past just a spreadsheet mentality of immediate ROI in a monthly report, in a quarterly P&L, or even in an annual report, in an annual P&L? Because there are some investments that will not pay off in a 12-month cycle. Quite a few investments that don't pay off, especially in fundraising, over a specific 12-month scenario. Major gifts are a great example of that, where January to December is not a good evaluative time frame for determining, did a major gift plan play out? That is not a good scenario. I mean, there's lots of evidence that says that major gifts take longer than 12 months, but certainly if you are iterating over that period of time, you're certainly not going to be able to test and improve in a 12-month period of time. If you're talking about annual fund, that's certainly not something you can test and iterate over a 12-month period of time. You're running that cycle just once. So how do we know what's worked in one series? And then, my goodness, how do we know if a tool or a technology or a platform has worked, or a consultancy or an agency has worked in 1 year? We don't. We don't know if any strategy has worked in 1 year. So I feel like we have abandoned a lot of the work that we have done too quickly because we haven't actually given it time to succeed and really try and test it. And Tammy, here's the thing. I think sometimes we've done this to people. I think we have put out job descriptions that say, we need a fundraiser to hit the ground running in the next 6 months. And they don't perform because we set unrealistic expectations that could not have been done in 3, 6, 9, 12 months or 18 months. And we let them go because they didn't perform to the standards that couldn't have been accomplished by a Tammy Zonker, a tremendous fundraiser. It couldn't have been done. I think this mentality is impacting burnout. I think it's impacting how organizations operate. I think it's impacting donor retention rates. I think it's impacting a whole host of problems inside of the sector that if we just changed the time frame that we looked at our problems, at our strategies, we just changed the time frame, we might look at things a little bit differently and evaluate things a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful and so deeply rooted in truth, such an empowering insight. And as you're speaking about, like, how long does it really take to cultivate and engage and steward a major donor toward their next significant gift, right, relative to their capacity? And I'm recalling Penelope Burke's work and her saying it takes about 2 years on average, according to her donor surveys, for a donor to trust a gift officer or an organization enough to give their most generous gift. And yet we do measure major gift officers like, did you hit your goal this quarter? Are you going to hit this, this next quarter? How much did you raise toward your major gift goal this year? And if they don't hit that number, they very well could be released, right? Let go. So we just one example of how we don't give things enough time. And so it seems to me setting some incremental measurements, some incremental metrics that identify that we are doing the work that needs to be done to deepen the relationship, to share the stories, to talk about the impact and, frankly, the needs.
Mm-hmm.
And pull back the curtain on some of the complexities of the problems we're working to solve, if we had some metrics around that, it would say, okay, well, maybe we haven't gotten that gift yet, but we are hitting all the metrics in terms of relationship development and communication.
Exactly right. And I think the issue is that we want, and this is actually how much I love behavioral science, that we want the metrics that are easily quantifiable, the things that we can put a number around. And we don't like squishy metrics, the touchy-feely metrics around how people feel, how connected they are to the organization, because we can't do an Excel calculation around that. Let me also add that when we do that with major gift officers, when we do that with plan giving or leadership gift officers, what we do is actually gamify and disincentivize the actual outcomes that we want. What we do is encourage people to shortcut trust and ask for a gift that is less than their most generous gift. Because if I need to get to $3 million for my annual portfolio, and I am not at that number, the best thing that I can do to make sure that I keep my job is ask that donor for any amount that will get me to that number, rather than wait for that donor to make their best gift.
Mm-hmm.
So I will do the things that will create the appearance that I have accomplished something, so that I can look good to my superiors in total dollars raised, or I will do things that check the box. Let's say we're doing a reasonable job of saying, like, you need to have these nice extras, like a meaningful touch point with your donor. I will check the box of sending an email or a note or whatever as sort of this, like, fine, I did it. But I know that what really matters is that I landed this dollar amount. So I'm going to aggressively solicit these donors. I'm going to move on from donors who I know are not ready to give in this calendar year or this fiscal year. I'm going to potentially engage in risky or slightly unethical behavior in order to close that gift. I'm going to accept a gift that maybe I shouldn't accept, that has strings attached to it, or is disadvantageous to my university or to my healthcare system or whatever, because I need to close that. And not even in major gifts, but think about an annual fund. If I need to get to a number, am I going to over solicit my donor file? Am I going to push another appeal out there because I need to land that number?
Yeah.
Am I going to buy a list because we need to get to a target number of donor acquisitions? I need 500 new donors this year. Why? That's a dumb number. That's a dumb number. If you can't keep 500 donors, then you don't need to acquire 500 donors.
Boom. That's a mic drop.
I appreciate you saying that, but that shouldn't be a mic drop, right? It shouldn't be. If you are saying, I want 500 donors, but not answering the question of how do I keep 500 donors, you are doing it wrong. I'm very loath to say anybody is doing it wrong. But if you are not answering that question of how do I keep 500 donors, then getting 500 donors doesn't help you at all. Doesn't help anybody.
So, Cherian, what is your most clear and direct advice to our listeners? I mean, because we just went down a rabbit hole, and there's like a lot and I'm sure our listeners are like, yes, I feel that pressure. I think that number is a dumb number too. It doesn't really further the mission and deepen relationships, but I got to hit the number. So I know that a good number of our listeners, and even in my past lived experience, I can totally relate to that. So what is like the most clear, direct advice that you can give to our listeners about how to balance the need and frankly pressure for immediate ROI with long-term strategic goals in their fundraising, and maybe even as a follow-on, especially when it comes to leveraging and investing in technology?
So I think the advantage of investing in technology is that we are now at a point where we don't have to look so myopically at just the numbers in a spreadsheet. And what I mean by that is we can look at things like rolling averages. We can put some measures around things that are hard to measure. And I'm not just talking about like artificial intelligence and sentiment analysis and whatnot, but the simple directive, because that's the question that you asked, is the simple directive that I share with teams is that you need to pair short-term metrics with long-term metrics. So think about the major gift portfolio example that we talked about in that rabbit hole. If the major gift portfolio goal is $3 million a year, rather than saying that the goal is $3 million a year every single year, what if we said that the goal was $9 million over 3 years and that our benchmarks are about that $3 million every single year and we're looking for progress around that? So are we setting up the right opportunities in one to enable those conversations to close those gifts over the next 3 years that would get us to those gifts? So are we having the right conversations with the right people for the right opportunities within our, organizational priorities that are based upon the capacity of those donors to say, maybe we're closing 1.5 or 2 in year one, but we're able to close 4 in year 2, and then we're able to close the last, 3, 4, whatever, maybe even 5 in year 3 to get us to and past that $9 million goal in year 3. So as opposed to looking myopically and specifically at just 1 year, thinking about it from a longer term perspective and saying, all right, we've got some goals and benchmarks, but we're extrapolating it out over a longer period of time and using our technology and investing in our tools to say, all right, how do we think about an opportunity as a bigger, more expansive concept and looking at touch points and donor journeys across a much broader, bigger approach that incorporates things like that initial gift, that those trust building exercises, events and other pieces that go into that, into blended gifts and, potentially even planned gifts as part of that, into a leadership gift strategy or whatever that looks like for your organization. All of those things that encourages us to step back and see the donor, our organization, our own fundraising strategy, the whole thing, see the forest, not just the trees.
Yeah.
And I think if we do that, then we can escape the tyranny of the metrics. We can escape that short-term bias thinking, the presentism, and say, this is what's best for everybody involved.
Absolutely love that. And I think what it really shines a bright light on is that ideally, this the way it should be is that our fundraising 3 to 5 year plan needs to be directly correlated to our organization's 3 to 5 year strategic plan.
Right.
And that gives us that bigger opportunity, the bigger context of what we are aiming to achieve as we invite supporters in to be partners in that work.
And I think, I would also share this podcast with leadership and remind leadership. And so now I'm just speaking to leadership right now. Your incentives need to be aligned with good, sustainable fundraising strategy. It does not help you. I'll use the Jim Langley analogy. It does not help you if your fundraisers are out there bulldozing the orchard of philanthropy and you are killing those trees at the expense of growing the garden of philanthropy. You want every single one of your gift officers, and maybe there's just one in your shop, and that's great. You want your fundraisers out there cultivating the ground, growing generosity, and as Tammy mentioned, figuring out what that best gift is for that person at the right time. The tools, the technologies, the consultants, the agencies all play a part in building that ecosystem over that period of time to do so. It is not a grab and go situation. So create the incentives that enable someone to do their best work, not the quick win. And if you align the incentives correctly, I would incentivize. I almost said over incentivize. I would over incentivize someone who builds a robust pipeline that doesn't necessarily produce an immediate gift or immediate gifts, but builds a robust pipeline such that it is a virtuous cycle that grows giving over the next 3, 5, 10, 20 years, because that is so much more valuable for your organization than anything else. That is long-term giving that can translate into leadership giving that your organization has not even contemplated yet. That can be advocacy, that can be donors and bringing other donors into your organization's fold that you don't even know about yet. That's what the opportunity is that you're leaving on the table. It's not just the dollars. There are tremendous opportunities that are leaving on the table. So if you're a senior leader, either in philanthropy or in the fundraising team or at the executive leader, or you're at the board table, please heed this, because and there's plenty of other, certainly listen to what Jim has to say, listen to other podcasts from Tammy. These are the people who are speaking this truth about sustainable growth in fundraising systems that will make a tremendous difference, even in scary times, that will grow your organizations and grow them well.
Cherian, can you give us some specific examples of incentives that you've seen work well?
The challenge is that organizational incentives are typically a lot like bonuses, compensation structures, like performance bonuses or promotions, are often aligned to fiscal year or annual revenue, right? And there's a difference between how people account for those things and how they're rewarded. So what I would say is, and I've done this with my own teams, where I've said there's a revenue goal that we have as a team, and there are things that we're going to look at individually in your performance review so that we're having this conversation to make sure that there's progress. But our goal is not perfection around these pieces. I want to celebrate team wins to make sure that we are clear around breaking down silos, making sure that we're working cross-functionally across the fundraising team. And so incentivizing that is very important to me, making sure that we're very clear about we all win when we all win. That's very important. And then at the individual level, to say very clearly, this is just me, so I'm not being prescriptive to anyone. I have always said to my teams, you will not get compensation bonus on solely revenue. If you bring in more dollars, but I see these problems, you will not get a compensation lift. I need to see these things. So I went the opposite way and said, you will be disincentivized on just an annual revenue increase if these other things didn't happen. If you fall backwards into a great gift, but you did the work, I'm not going to penalize you for that if you did all the good things. But if you went scorched earth on the portfolio that I gave you, you will not get any extra compensation as a result of that. So I wanted that to be very clear. And then I was looking at things like, how do the feedback surveys from donors, when donors talk about their relationship with the organization, when people respond to, and it doesn't need to be about the person specifically, it can be about the organization. How do they, if they're assigned to your portfolio and we're talking to them, how are they responding? What do those intangibles look like? Those are all credits, if you will, in the incentive system.
I like that. I suspect that most of our listeners want to explore predictive and generative AI tools, like Hindsight and others offer. They want to increase efficiencies. They want to gain insight into donor behaviors and patterns, things that they wouldn't necessarily see by pouring through the data themselves manually. So what are your suggestions for how to justify investment in those tools and technologies, or to your point, a consultant or other resources that they need, so that executive leadership and board members view those tools and resources as an investment versus that expense line item on a budget? We can't spend that money. It's they simply view it as an expense?
So the best analogy that I would use is on like a quality pair of shoes. And I don't spend a lot of money on shoes, but what I found is that if I have a very inexpensive pair of shoes, they wear out very quickly, and they wear out at the wrong time, and I have to go quickly find another pair of shoes. And there are other examples. You probably have something in your own life where you just run through them very, very quickly, and you have to go buy another thing. And this is the old adage of, cutting off your nose to spite your face. It's an instance where you do things on the cheap, but you actually end up spending more money because you wanted to spend less money on an incremental basis. There are times where, like, I'll go to Costco and buy a lot of toilet paper because I just know, and my middle kid is going through unit cost economics. So we go through the grocery store and he's comparing costs on volume. And like, we're going to buy this at this store because it is actually cheaper on unit cost. And sometimes we look at products and we say, this is a more expensive product, but when you amortize it over the time you will use it, when you think about the value per use case, it's actually quite a bit cheaper. So, like, for example, I have a Vitamix blender. I'm a huge fan of the Vitamix blender. Don't even talk to me about Ninja blenders. And it's an expensive blender, but we use it every single day. So when you think about the cost per day of using that blender versus like an Oster blender that costs $30, but it breaks and it can't do half the things, and I would buy 4 blenders in the next 4 years, now we're talking about even. What does this have to do with the technology, the consultants, or whatever? Do those technologies or those consultants or those agencies actually make you more efficient? You have to make a determination in your organization of, can I do this work on my own? Or do these tools, technologies, people, whatever, help me do the work that I can do more effectively? And if the answer is yes, then the question is, how do I parse that cost out across the work that I'm doing? Most of these data sets are less than the cost of a single major gift. And I've talked about like all of them, right? So if you get one major gift out of any of those tools, you're equal or ahead. That's pretty straightforward.
Paid for itself in one gift.
Like I'm doing work for all of the competitors out there. The CRM, right? If you don't have a CRM, which I will go on a limb and say that's a pretty big mistake. The CRM makes sure that you are keeping track of who your donors are, when they gave, how much they gave, so that you are able to focus on things like retention, lapsed donors, who's current, making sure that you can do stewardship. Those are basic things that can make sure that you are staying in front of your donors in an effective way. There's tremendous ROI on that. There's immediate ROI on something like that. And unless you have like 5 donors, there's ROI on a CRM. On a consultant, like it depends on the consultant, right? Like on what you need and what you're looking for. There are some consultants that are absolute gold. I would never replace a consultant. When I was working, I loved consultants and coaches. Like I currently spend a lot of money on coaches for myself personally, and I would not replace any of them. They are invaluable to me. There are other people who, are not as great and not as valuable to me. That's fine too. My point is, when you look at the value that they bring, you need to stop thinking about the cost and think about the value that they bring. And once you start looking at that, it really puts into perspective, this makes a huge difference in terms of what I can now achieve as a person, as an organization. And if this investment of $5,000, $50,000, $500,000 can create a virtuous cycle that lends itself to orders of magnitude of change in my organization, well, you would be foolish not to invest in those things. If you have 1,000, 5,000 donors and you're a team of 1, or 2 or 3 or 4, and you can't prioritize your donors, you don't know who they are or what their previous philanthropic giving is, and you don't have enough information about them, and you're talking about the investment of literally one major gift to get potentially 10 or 100 major gifts out of that resource. I mean, what are we talking about? What's the worst that could happen out of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Talk to us about how this technology, the additional insights, the efficiency it can create. I mean, a lot of people worry, these technology and artificial intelligence, it's going to replace humans.
Yeah.
And we know that's not the case, right? The intention is that it would free us up. To automate some things would free us up to spend more face time with our donors, which we're constantly saying we want and need so desperately. What's your point of view on that? And what have you seen really work? What's the impact of technology in not dehumanizing, but rather creating more human connection?
So I certainly think that's the intention, and well-meaning folks believe that. I do think there is a risk of over-automating things and over artificial sweetener on, fundraising. So I worry about that, where that line is, and we need to be really cautious about that. At the same time, there are things that we would never give up, right? Like nobody wants to go back to, our early days of fundraising when we were doing things on typewriters. Nobody wants to do that. So that level of some automation or level of technology has helped us do our work in a better, more efficient manner. So we just need to figure out where the line is. And where I think automation and artificial intelligence things, where it really makes a difference, is on the ticky-tacky work that no human needs to do. Moving data from one place to another, doing calculations. As long as we feel comfortable with a human oversight on that type of thing, we just need to let the oversight for sure, and then let the data do the data thing, let the calculations do the data thing, and then, as you said, free the humans up to do the last mile work, to build the relationship, sit across the table and have the cup of coffee. I think systems that integrate automation and AI inside of the CRM, having, automating the transcription of contact reports and pulling in information into drafting an email to a constituent or pulling together a report. Those are all things that are simple, straightforward. Nobody needs to actually, I guess there are some people, few people really love pulling together a SQL report or love doing the data analytics, right? Like that's great for some people, but if you just need to know how many donors gave over $5,000 in the last 6 months, I just want the names. Like I want the output, and I want to be able to trust the output, of course, but at the end of the day, these are things where the output is what I need so I can do the real work.
Yes.
So that's what I think is opportunity. And ultimately, if those things can sit in one enclosed system, we feel like these pieces are all trustworthy, they're secure, SOC 2 compliant and all of those things, then I feel like we're empowered as fundraisers to do the work that we are best suited to do.
And now for a final word from our sponsor.
Every fundraiser knows that the secret to success lies in creating authentic connections. This starts with data, but that data needs to turn into insights that inspire action, which in turn fosters generosity and long-term donor relationships. Kindsight's fundraising intelligence solution lets any nonprofit do just that at any scale, with the world's largest proprietary donor database, AI-powered content generation, an award-winning CRM built specifically for fundraising teams, and much more. Go to kindsight.io to see it in action.
Yeah, to really work in our zone of genius, so to speak.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, I can't let you go without asking your point of view on, the current political and economic challenges here in the U.S. I mean, Canada has its own challenges as well. But if you can speak, I mean, we are in a time of uncertainty. What is your perspective on the U.S. funding freezes, the budget cuts, what advice specifically would you give to our listeners? How would you invite our listeners to put themselves in a position of strength in these uncertain times?
The best advice that I can give you, your listeners, is the advice that I would give you and me to ourselves, is take care of yourselves, because it just never seems to stop. It just seems like one uncertainty after another, and this one is both political and economic and all the things. So I don't have any specific advice because I don't know what's happening. And I don't think anybody does. So the uncertainty won't stop in the near term, and the volatility won't stop in the near term. What I would suggest as an actionable step is to be absolutely honest with your people, internally and externally, not to put on a toxic positivity face with your staff or with your donors. Let them know that the work matters and it will continue one way or another. Generosity will figure it out, will find a way. It will happen. It has happened for millennia. It will happen next year, next decade, next century. The work that you do matters, and it will find a way.
Yeah.
That's what we do. We figure it out. And I don't know how, but I know one thing. We figure it out together. That's why resources like this podcast matter. That's why associations like AFP matter, because we get together, we listen to each other, we come up with ideas. And even if we don't come up with ideas, we're here for each other. I can run into you at an event, or I can just call you and be like, Tammy, I'm having a bad day.
Yes.
What do I do? That's not what it's like in other industries. And that's why I love being part of this sector. So my advice to your listeners is, if it feels hard, reach out to someone. And if you don't have a someone, reach out to me. I'm happy to call or get on a Zoom call with you.
Yeah, amazing and beautiful. Cherian, as you know, as a repeat guest, at the end of each episode, I like to ask a few rapid fire, insightful questions to provide extra value for our listeners. Are you game for the third round?
I think so. I was saying before, I don't remember what I said before, so I hope this is not duplicative.
Well, I'm wondering, and I'm going to do a little due diligence to see how your answers might have changed.
Yeah.
Right? We all evolve, we iterate, we have new experiences. So here we go. What's maybe I'll say the latest best fundraising advice you've ever received?
I think I may have said this before. The thing that I said before, I believe I said before, it bears repeating, is what Rory Vaden said. Rory Vaden wrote the book, Take the Stairs and Procrastinate on Purpose. And he says that you are best positioned to help the person you once were. And at this point in my career, I look at people who are just starting out in fundraising, even if they're older than me. And I'm like, what have I gone through that can help someone else that is going through something that I've been through? So since I've said that, if you'll indulge me, my friend Amy Port said something a few weeks ago that Amy Port lives rent-free in my head all the time as well. And she quoted, I want to say it was Ira Glass or someone, who said that when you start out in a craft, like an art, like fundraising, you have these aspirations because you see someone and they're doing it well. But once you start doing it, you start to get kind of good at it. And then you start to see your sights start to elevate. And I'm doing Amy and the person she quoted in justice, but your sights start to elevate and your elevation of the craft grows so that the work of the craft is a deeply unsatisfying work. And what sits with me about fundraising and a lot of other things in my life is that no matter how long I've been in it and how much I learn, there is so much more to learn. There is so much more to the work. There's so much more craft. So if there's one piece of advice that I would take from that, it's that you're never done. You're never done.
Yeah. And if you think you're done, you are done.
That's right.
Cherian, what book do you recommend to our audience and why?
I'm pretty sure that I have not recommended this book to your audience. I'm holding it up like your audience can see it. It's called Exactly What to Say by Phil M. Jones. It takes exactly 72 minutes to read it, so it's blessedly short, but it is a master class in the language to use for fundraisers. Phil makes the point that the worst time to think about the thing that you're going to say is in the moment that you're saying it. And once you read the book, you will understand what to say. You will understand exactly what to say.
Amazing. Thank you. What are the 3 most important traits a successful fundraiser must possess?
Curiosity. Fundraisers have to ask great questions. They have to be genuinely interested in what donors are interested in. They have to have empathy. They have to care about what donors care about. Resilience, what we just talked about with external factors, but also internal factors inside of their work and their job. And if you're doing your job right, remember that donors are not saying no, not ever. They're saying no, not now, no, not to that project. So just thinking through that piece as well.
Yeah, good. What's your favorite fundraising application or tool?
Can I give you 2?
Yes.
It's the pen and the phone. Write something and call somebody.
Yes. Yes. I noticed you didn't say the keyboard.
I did not.
Yeah. Take note, listeners. So good. What's your favorite conference and why, as a man who's on the road every week?
Yeah, I feel like I've been to all of them. So I'm on the board of AFP, and I will also, I've said this before, I'm going to say AFP icon. They're all of the conferences are great. I go to all of them and they're all great.
Knowing what you know now about fundraising, what advice would you give your younger self just getting started in the profession?
I honestly don't remember what I said before, but I will say now, just give yourself a lot of grace. We all make mistakes. We're all still learning as we go. Give yourself grace.
Yeah, love that. Cherian, you are amazing. It is always great to talk with you.
You are amazing. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Cherian. If you want to learn more about the incredible Cherian Koshy or Kindsight's amazing fundraising tools and resources, if you want to follow Cherian on LinkedIn, or if you want to learn more about any of the resources we've discussed today, check out the links in the show notes. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Intentional Fundraiser Podcast. Keep on transforming your fundraising so you can transform the world. See you next time.
The Intentional Fundraiser Podcast is a Fundraising Transformed original. I'm Trent Thompson, the executive producer and CMO and head of community at Fundraising Transformed. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review it and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Visit fundraisingtransformed.com to get resources mentioned during this episode and subscribe to our Scaling Major Gifts newsletter.